Hey Curtis, how's it going?
Hey, Mark, I'm doing well. How are you?
Pretty good. We're live. We're off and running. So this is the first time we've literally spoken to each other. It's great to meet
True, true, it is. It's good to meet you too, Mark.
you. So yeah, I'd like to just kind of dive into this and uh, let's see where this goes. I came across your latest article on Relevant magazine, entitled "The Age of Deconstruction and the Future of the Church." Uh, How long did it take you to come up with that title? Because that's quite a hook.
Um, Honestly, I know this is going to sound ridiculous, but pretty much immediately.
Oh wow.
Um, yeah,
Okay.
I heard about the Gospel Coalition's book. I Googled it. I read their article,
Mm,
and something within me was like, deconstruction is kind of taking over
oh,
our culture right now, and I think it is a beneficial future for the church, or it leaves the door open for a beneficial future for the church. So it just kind of hit me.
yeah. So I guess just to set the stage for people listening to this, we sort of talked about it on Instagram. Let's do like some sort of introduction stuff, and then what I'd like to do is just to kind of go through step by step through your article and just kind of like expound on it and talk about it because I think I'll say this off the bat. I was just thinking as I was waiting to jump on this call. I feel like this is a reckoning. Like I just the word reckoning just came to me. I was like, this feels like a reckoning. Like
Hmm.
is like you say, this whole deconstruction thing is not a fad. It's not going away. So I guess what I would like to ask, um, for the sake of clarity, do you and you do talk about it a bit in the article we will get to obviously, but do you have sort of like a working definition of deconstruction for those who may not be familiar?
I don't really have a real like concrete one because everybody really defines it differently based on their own experience. I really try to make it as generic and approachable as possible. So for me, it's just revisiting your beliefs, typically beliefs that you have grown up with or were instilled in you by your parents or your community. It's just revisiting those beliefs and or those beliefs and reevaluating them,
Mm,
reevaluating based on the new information I have, as an adult and as someone who's been through the things I've been through and experienced God the way I have. Do these still hold up? Um,
yeah.
are they important does it matter if they hold up or not? And where do we go from here? So for me, it's just revisiting your beliefs and reevaluating them.
Yeah, so just for let's dive right into it. I guess. Um, this first sort of chunk of the article, you say Christians are falling left and right. Evangelicals, Protestants alike, are grasping feebly to understand what is the cause of this wave of evolving faith, particularly referred to as construction. In short, deconstruction is a popular term that refers to the practice of revisiting and rethinking long-held beliefs, which is what you basically just sort of hashed out. Specifically
Hmm.
in the Christian faith, Richard Rohr is perhaps the most well known Christian leader to popularize the term. Rohr often describes healthy faith development as one that undergoes three stages, which I really like this thing here. So you say construction, building your belief system and worldview, deconstruction, challenging that worldview and subsequent beliefs, and then reconstruction, rebuilding a new, more holistic set of beliefs and worldview. Now, I know that the term reconstruction can be a bit of a, some people aren't too, fond of that term. I've noticed as well.
Right.
They're like, no, 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 there's no set rules here. I'm not necessarily reconstructing. I just want to, and it reminds me, Rob Bell in a podcast years ago had this saying. He said it was a old, like a rabbinic kind of a saying that says any old donkey can tear down a barn, but it takes a special one to build one.
Yes, yes, I've heard that quote and I love it.
Oh, I love it too. Yeah, it's so great, so great. But so yeah, like for me, so I will say a few things here about myself because this is, as I mentioned, this is going to be the pilot episode of my new podcast, Beyond Deconstruction, which is basically my brand at this point. There's like a website, I'm working on a book, like it's kind of my thing.
Yeah.
So,
I saw that you were writing a book. I'm excited about it.
oh, so am I. It's also a little daunting, but I've basically through the first
Oh yeah.
chapter. I've posted what is, I guess, a rough edit of what could be the first chapter on my website, Beyond Deconstruction.
I've written a book. It's not easy, man, and it takes a while, but
Yeah, we can
I'm
talk about
excited for yours. I'm
that.
sure it'll be great.
Let's maybe talk about that off air, maybe. But um, oh, I mean, I'd love to hear about your book for the listeners later on. We can definitely promote that. But yeah. So I think this is interesting. Like, yeah. So yeah. A little of my story for those that may not be aware. Um, I grew up evangelical, Pentecostal, pretty fundamental, all the all the words. I went to Christian schooling. I exclusively listened to Christian music. Um, all my friends were Christians. I mean, this is pre-internet, so there's no social media. Your world is your world back in those days. And I grew up essentially in a bubble of religion and faith. I knew nothing else. And often I say to people, if somebody says to me, like, why do you believe in God? I'm like, I don't know how not to. I don't know if that resonates
Mm.
with you, but when it's all you know, it's like it's all you know, right? So um, I was very zealous in my sort of teenage years, 17, 18, 19, into my 20s. I got into street evangelism for about 4 or 5 years. I used to go out and give people gospel tracts, and I followed the ministry of Ray Comfort, if you're familiar with that guy. The atheists like to call him the Banana Man. um, but he lives in California. He's from New Zealand originally, actually. But he has this TV show thing called Way of the Master, and he teaches you how to go out and share your faith. And so I did that, and then fast forward to 2008, I was diagnosed with bipolar after a manic episode, which included not sleeping for around 3 days and having some sort of light hallucinations, which was fun. Uh, but 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 yeah, so that was kind of the the what lit the fuse, I guess you could say, for me in regards to deconstruction. I was a person
Yeah.
that I would say very much felt the presence of God growing up. I was like, the one with my hands up in the worship and closing my eyes and, feeling all the
Hmm.
feelings. And then after this experience, those feelings were just gone, like gone. And I just felt nothing. And I was like, oh shit. Like, what do I do?
Yeah.
And I had a good friend of mine who actually gave me Rob Bell's first two to read. And it gave me enough space because I was like, can I even call myself a Christian anymore? Like what? Like I don't feel like I'm faithful. Like I was in a very I use the term disorientation in my book. I'm like, this is a spiritual disorientation. Like, where am I?
Yes.
Um, and so those books, especially Velvet Elvis, which is his first book, which I highly recommend. I think it still holds up to this day. He talks about doubt and questions, and he just kind of creates enough space for you to say, "Oh wow, it's still okay to journey with these questions and processing." And I think I'll ask you this question: do you think that in an ideal situation, this whole deconstruction process should be happening within the context of church community?
Well, so there's a lot of there's a lot of sticky situations with this question because we all have very different experiences of what church community means.
Right.
For me, my church community was almost always very encouraging and very supportive of me. But as I said in my article, I'm a life coach, a certified life coach now, and I mostly work with people who are deconstructing.
Mm.
And the vast majority of the people that I work with did not have that experience. Their church was like often a place of kind of fear of being
Mm.
different and standing out. And so for people that's what they think of when they think of church or when they hear the word church, then I would honestly probably say no. I don't think it's going to be healthy or beneficial for you to
Okay.
deconstruct
Yeah.
in that type of
Well,
environment.
maybe let
But
me rephrase the question. In a healthy,
yeah,
I'd say in a healthy church environment, do you think that would be
yes,
a safe
yeah.
discussion?
Yeah. So, and that, I mean, that's where I was going with that. And I think that deconstruction done in isolation is almost tragic because
Oh, I could,
um,
yeah,
not even speaking on the faith side of it, just on the mental and emotional toll that it has on you and the struggle that you're going through. The most important thing that you can do during deconstruction is let people who love you and who embrace you surround you and walk through it with you, even if they don't understand, even if they're not going
mm,
through it. And they can also offer a little bit of a balance. Sometimes in deconstruction, you're like, I don't even know who I am
oh yeah,
anymore. And people that know you and love you can say, well, we know who you are. Like you're Kurtis, you're Mark, like you're you and you mean the world to us and
yeah.
you will get through this.
Oh,
There is light at the end of the tunnel. So I think deconstruction should, I think ideally it would be done in the context of loving community.
yeah,
The problem is that's not possible for a lot of people because their community kind of has not been loving or kind
yeah,
of shuts off loving them
yeah.
well.
Yeah, I definitely understand what you're saying. I mean, I'm a person, I've just got back into a church community recently, as in like 2 weeks ago. Um,
Yeah. Oh, wow.
I went to this charity dinner a few weeks back, and I met this woman. She came over and sat at our table, and she had this like bright pink dress on. She had this kind of hippie vibe, and she's like, "Oh, her name's Catherine," and she starts, asking what I do, and I'm like, "Oh, I've done some podcasting. I'm trying to write a book at the moment, blah blah blah." I just, did a little rant about what I'm up to, and then my friend said to her, "Oh, what do you do?" And she goes, "Oh, I'm a pastor." And I was like, and I said to her, I was like, "Well, I'm glad I said all those things to you," because I started talking to her about deconstruction conversation and all that. And I,
Right.
well, I'm glad I
Right.
said all those things to you before I knew you were a pastor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But she was great. And we had this great conversation. And like, she's just come out of seminary. Like, she was like 7 weeks into this role as a pastor. So it's like new for her as well. And she goes, "I'm preaching
Hmm.
on Sunday for the first time." And I was like, "Where?" And she told me, and I was like, "I'm going to be there." And I just, because I clicked with her immediately. And I said to her in
Yeah.
conversation in regards to this whole deconstruction thing, I was like, "Catherine," I was like, "if there were more people like you in the church, there'd be less people deconstructing their faith." Because she's just not afraid of the questions, not afraid of the process at all. And I
Right.
was like, and
Right.
I'm sort of pushing for, I want a sort of a meetup. I'm in New Zealand, so we're at the bottom of the planet, but I would love to have like a meetup group in regards to this kind of conversation. So that's kind of what I'm pushing towards. It might start off as like a Zoom call and then just get people in or whatever, and then go from there. But getting back to this article, I'll just read this next chunk of it. You say, a few years ago, deconstruction was a new term gaining some ground in the public. Today, it is a culture wide phenomenon with thousands of books, podcasts, and social media accounts. You say thousands of books? Do you mean thousands of individual titles or just books being printed in the thousands?
Well, the word for thousands is relating to books, podcast, and social media
Oh,
accounts. Like it's all over
I
our
see you.
culture across multiple
Oh, right,
mediums.
right, right. Yeah, I've got like three on my
Yeah.
website, beyonddeconstruction.com. Shameless plug. But there's like a podcast link. So there's like 3 pages of podcasts in the deconstruction conversation space kind of thing.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
Oh yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
No, okay, cool. Um, so you say thousands of books, podcasts, and social media accounts dedicated to it. And then I love this. You say, including my Instagram account. What is your Instagram handle, just for the listeners?
It's just Curtis Vanderpool. Curtis is spelt with a K, and Vanderpool has two O's at the
Okay,
end.
cool. And then you say, and your book, Giving Up Sunday, which we will get to. We will get to.
Hmm.
I just want to get through the article first, if that's okay. So
Yeah.
yeah. So and then you say every other week it seems there is new buzz about the next prominent Christian influencer that is renouncing their faith and stepping into a new life. Joshua Harris, the author of I Kiss Dating Goodbye, Rhett and Link of the hit YouTube channel Good Mythical Morning, even famous worship leaders like Audrey Assad and Marty Sampson of Hillsong. I'm not who is, just out of curiosity, who's Audrey Assad? Because I don't know that name.
Yeah, so she's a little bit less known. This one was important for me to put in because she very recently posted on her social media accounts that she no longer identifies as a
Oh
Christian,
wow.
but she is someone that is personally a very big part of my story when I started going through deconstruction about 6 or 7 years ago. I didn't know that I was going through deconstruction, so I was just consumed by a bunch of by all this anger that I had towards the hypocrisy of the church and the poor leadership. And she was actually she came and played at a conference that I went to for youth ministry workers called National Youth Workers with youth specialties. And she just, the way that she led and sang music, it was beautiful, one, but then she was just so humble
Yeah.
about it. She looked to stage left. She didn't even look at the crowd, and she just worshiped in front of
Yeah.
us. So she was such a big, that moment watching her just kind of reminded me like, oh, this is about
Yeah.
me and Jesus. It's not about like what everybody else is doing wrong. And so when she stepped away from the faith, it was kind of a kick in my stomach, but I've kind of followed her journey over the last couple of years,
Mm.
and I get
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So
Oh wow.
that was the main reason that I included her.
It's always interesting to dive into the details. Yeah, I didn't
Yeah,
when I
yeah,
asked you that
absolutely.
question, I didn't expect like a story behind it. I was just like genuinely curious as to who she was. But so it goes on a little bit here. Deconstruction is no longer a fad. It is not simply a season. It is not going away anytime soon. So let's talk about that a little bit because that's only like 3 lines there, but I think there's quite a lot in that. You know, it's no longer a fad, not
Yeah.
simply a season, and it's not going away anytime soon. I feel like this is
Hmm.
my 2 cents on it. I think I sort of describe it. I feel as though the deconstruction community is almost like the dirty little secret of the evangelical world. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It's like
Oh yeah.
we are the bastard child of an illegitimate marriage that they don't want to talk about, you know? And
Right.
I don't know if that metaphor completely works, but it sounded poetic. But anyway, um, I'm just trying to sound profound. But no, I've spoken to a couple of people about this, but I had this experience in a similar way. As I mentioned, when I followed the ministry of Ray Comfort, he's, you know, as an evangelist, um, his ministry, the way I describe it is it'll hug you and at the same time stab you in the back. Like,
Yeah.
he has this message. Well, his main message is called Hell's Best Kept Secret, and he talks all about the Ten Commandments and the law of God being written on a heart, and everyone knows they're a liar and a thief, and blah 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 blah. And it's all about. It's really a sales pitch. Like I kind of say this half seriously. He kind of. I've been in sales as a career for the last 10 years. He kind of taught me sales, because the way he does that. It's like problem solution, right? Like your problem is you've broken God's law, and the solution is Jesus died. And it's like
Right.
so
Right.
it's so 101 level that it's ridiculous. Like his whole ministry essentially is predicated on the fear of death. It's like 10 out of 10
Oh
people
yeah.
die. He literally used to have like a counter on his website saying like 150,000 people will pass into eternity every 24 hours, you know? And it's just like, and I mean, that guy's just consumed by the fear of death. Like he talks about seeing his wife and going, "Oh, one day she's gonna die," and oh my god. And I was like, dude, I think you might need some therapy. Like, it's like, wow,
Hmm.
you know. But the thing about
Hmm.
it is, so yeah, so his main message is this hell's best kept secret thing. But then the second most popular message he preaches is called true and false conversions. So this is the airtight theology of it all, right? So you can follow his ministry for years and years and years, and then if you get to a point of questioning it or deconstructing it, they'll just turn around and go, "Oh, you're a false convert," you know?
Yeah. Yeah. You were
Yeah,
never really saved
exactly
anyway.
right. And it's like, oh,
Right.
well, shit, you know, like that's great. I just invested 5 years of my life and probably multiple thousands of dollars into your ministry, and that's my leaving present. You know? Uh,
Hmm.
so I
Hmm.
would love to talk to that guy. I tried to get him on my old podcast, Fundamental Escape, back in the day. Um, So yeah, but anyways, I digress. So let's go forward here. So you talk here about the Gospel Coalition's response. Now I came across their article as well in their book. There's actually a few people in the deconstruction community. I'm not sure if you're aware of this. So the title of the Gospel Coalition book is "Before You Lose Your Faith: Deconstructing in the Church." I've been speaking to somebody, I won't name names, but there's some whispers of a plan from the deconstruction community to write a response book called Before You Lose Your Brain. Yeah,
Yikes! Yikes!
which I think is hilarious. So yeah, you say so. It says the Gospel Coalition recognized that deconstruction is more potent than many believed it would be, and decided it was time to respond by putting out a book entitled "Before You Lose Your Faith: Deconstructing in the Church." I wonder, do you feel, is it your sort of feeling and inclination that this whole thing's reached a tipping point to where they can't ignore it anymore? Is that kind of what's happening?
Yeah, I think it was first. It was always the one or two wackos in the church that were, just way too mystical or new agey,
Yeah.
and then I really see the catalyst, at least in my life, was "Love
Oh
Wins" by Rob
yeah,
Bell. That when that hit the scene, it kind of
yeah,
erupted. And then, but even for a long time after that, it was just like, oh, well, this prominent Christian leader here, that prominent Christian leader there, and a couple people in the church. And I really feel like church leaders tried to
mm,
downplay it as just, people
yeah.
people leave, and that's sad, and it happens. But now it's happening on
Oh
such a
yeah,
scale,
yeah.
such a grand scale, that I really do think it is kind of reaching a tipping point, and they're recognizing it, and so they're trying to get ahead of it, which I commend them for it. Like, at least they're finally
Yeah,
acknowledging it.
yeah.
Yeah, as you can tell from the what we're about to talk about in the article, I didn't think it
Oh
was the
no, no,
best
no.
response.
It's interesting. Love Wins for me was a huge game changer for myself as well. As an ex-evangelist, you could probably imagine what that book would have been for me. I actually spoke to Rob about it. I had him on my old podcast as well, and
Yeah.
I said to him, I said, when I read your book, Love Wins, I was like, I didn't think to myself, here is some new ideas I've never thought of. I said, the feeling I had was, oh man, I'm not the only one going through this process. you know, I just felt this.
Hmm.
It's a very Rob Bell word to use, but he talks about solidarity, right? It's just like solidarity. I was like, oh man, I'm not alone. And I was genuinely feeling like, why aren't more
Yes.
people questioning that? I mean, the first episode of my original podcast, which isn't on Spotify for some reason, I need to figure that out. But it was with the guy Kevin Miller who um, made a documentary called Hellbound off the back of Love Wins, essentially. And he interviewed people like Brian McLaren and Mark Driscoll, and like there was a good mix of voices in that documentary. It's worth having a look at. But but yeah, like you say, this isn't going away. It's not a fad. They have to deal with it. Um, she said in an
Hmm.
article released by the Gospel Coalition regarding the book, the Gospel Coalition expressed some measure of acceptance regarding deconstruction. What was it that led you to say that? Because I didn't really pick up on that.
Um. Well, they there used to be the typical response was, especially with the people that I've worked with, the response was, you're falling off the track, you're backsliding, or the famous phrase, you're on a slippery slope. And the article that they released about this didn't start off that way. It didn't sound like, hey, you're really having issues, you're really struggling. They really started off saying, like, questioning your faith is fine. It's healthy for it's good for healthy
Mm.
spiritual growth. And then they were like, but, and so even just acknowledging, like, questions are good, questions are healthy. That is a little bit. That's a little bit of a
I
step in the right direction that most people don't ever experience in
maybe
their
I'm a
church
little
community.
cynical on this, but I don't buy it personally. I think it's a thin veneer.
Yeah, well, it could be, but that's what they said. And since I don't personally know the people, that are writing it, then unfortunately I can't decide. I
Yeah.
can't discern if it
I
is
commend you for
a
your,
veneer or if it is fake. But that's what they said, so I got to
I
take them for
commend you
what
for
they
your
said.
generous interpretation.
Thank you. I have to have positive assumptions of
Yeah,
people,
no,
or I
I
will go
agree with
crazy.
that.
I will
But
die in my
Brene Brown talks
cynicism.
about that. You quote Brene Brown in a second in the article, but she talks about that idea of assuming that those around you are doing the best with what they have. You know, so I can't. Yeah, so I'm kind
Right.
of with you on that,
Yeah.
but I'm a little cynical on this subject, maybe.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
Oh, you say that later in the article. You said there's that line where you say, "Who could blame them?" I'm like, oh man, that's kind of heartbreaking. But we'll get to that. So
Yeah.
however, you say, however, it eventually becomes apparent that to me they're writing a book about something they have little understanding or experience. So I think you kind of bring some balance to that part of the article when you say that. It's like there might be
Yeah.
good intentions, but there's a lot of ignorance here.
Right. Yeah. Well, as one of my good friends who grew up a lot more conservative, evangelical Christian, he just recently started going through deconstruction in the last year or two, and for years he just kind of
Oh,
looked at me like I was nuts. But he just looked at me a couple weeks ago and said, "I'm sorry, you don't
I felt
understand
that.
until it hits you." And so that's kind of how I feel about this. I'm like, they can say they can say some good things about it, but they don't really understand if they haven't gone through it or if they haven't really done the
Yeah.
work to dig in with people who are going
My
through it to
friend,
try to understand them.
I'll mention him by name because he won't mind. But my friend Dan, I actually spoke with him last night. He's a really great guy. But I remember a number of years ago being at his house and trying to explain to him some of the concepts from Peter Rollins. And I think he said in the conversation, he
Yeah,
goes, "I feel like I'm on drugs."
yeah, yeah. Peter Rollins will do
Oh,
that if you're not
totally,
ready for it.
totally, absolutely, absolutely. So let's keep moving forward. We can talk about drugs and psychedelics maybe another time. Um, the main takeaways I was able to decipher from the article is that deconstruction is only beneficial if done within the context of church affiliation. So we kind of talked about that earlier, which is interesting. Um, Simply put, deconstruct all you want, but don't leave your church. So it's the fine print, isn't it? It's where you like, fine to ask questions, but
Yeah,
dot 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 dot. Like, you know, don't ask these. Rob Bell was, he
yeah,
had that line
absolutely.
in his book Love Wins, right? Where it was like, many people have been searching and asking questions only to be told by their church leaders, like, we don't ask these questions here, you know. Um,
Right,
so
right.
to say, oh, what? Sorry. To that I say, trust me, we have tried for years. That Can you talk about that line a little bit? Because I feel like there's a lot of angst and frustration in that one sentence.
Yeah, see now you're seeing where my
Oh,
positive
it
assumptions
totally
kind of
is.
run out a little bit. um, yeah, that has been my story. I've kind of questioned things for a long, long time. I remember being like 20 years old and a counselor at church camp, and we had the biggest night of worship, and all the students were really into their experience with God.
Mm,
And then we took up an offering, and I went to the directors and I was like, "Why are we taking an offering from 11-year-olds when their emotions are super high?" And so I've always just kind of questioned stuff like that. And even that, like, I wasn't trying to be rebellious. I've never been trying to be rebellious, which is the label that they often put
yeah,
on people who ask questions, is that they're a rebel, that they're causing
yeah,
dissension or division. And really, like, we're just trying to dig into this visceral communal faith
mm,
experience together. And that was really what I was wanting. I was like, please tell me why we do this. I want to learn, and I also
yeah,
want to maybe challenge it. And that you just kind of get the cold shoulder or the easy answer, or you get told we don't
yeah.
ask those kinds of questions here. Um, and so it's just, it's not that we haven't. The article from the Gospel Coalition kind of made it seem like we were really struggling with our faith and our doubts, and so we just
Oh
bailed.
man,
And
that's
that's really not
cool.
true
No,
for the
no,
vast majority. Maybe I would say
yeah,
probably 98% of people that
yeah,
deconstruct. When they start deconstructing, they look
yeah,
to the people around them that have walked with them in their faith, and they say, "Hey, help me," and then they aren't met with love and acceptance and help.
Yeah.
They're met with condemnation and judgment
There's
and
that quote.
exclusion.
Oh, I wish I had it in front of me. In Brian McLaren's latest book called Faith After Doubt, and he quotes the late
Mm-hmm.
Rachel Held Evans, and I can almost quote it word for
Mm-hmm.
word, but it's just basically where she says, you know, there are books written on how to deal with the loss of a marriage, a job, a deferred,
Right.
the loss of a pet, you know, whatever. Da, 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 da. She goes, but when it comes to losing your faith, she goes, you're on your own for that. And it's like, man, this is the quote that I
Yes.
read to people who don't understand deconstruction. I'm like, I read them this quote and I'm like, if you don't feel the heaviness of this, you need to learn some empathy because it's so heavy. And she says, I
Yes.
she says,
Yeah.
I've
Well.
realized that my Christian friends didn't want to walk down this dark and scary path with me. She goes, they wanted to fix me. She says
Right.
they wanted to wind me up like an
Mm-hmm.
old-fashioned toy and send me down the road with a painted smile on my face and tiny symbols in my hand. Oh, I
Man,
need
she's
to
so
read
good,
this.
isn't
Like,
she? I
oh
actually got to
wow,
meet her once, and it just, I didn't know what she was going to mean for me later on in my life, but her words are
what was your
insane.
interaction like with her?
But
Like, was
you know that
was it a good meeting or?
oh, it was just kind of in passing. Again, it was at that. I used to be a youth pastor, so it was at that
Oh, okay.
National Youth Workers Convention, and she came and spoke, and I think she was speaking in regards
Oh,
to my
wow.
year of biblical womanhood. But I ran into her in the hallway and
Yeah.
just thanked her for the things that she said. But you know, these days she's just such a prophetic voice for so many of us that she does
Yeah.
not even get in to see how many
Right.
millions of us are following in her footsteps. But you know, I did want to say, like, the thing about people trying to fix us, and it's not even from a church level, from a church leadership level. It definitely is. But the hard thing about it is that it's even
Oh,
from our friends and our family. And I can be disappointed with them, but I do understand that they are doing what they think is best to love us. They're afraid. They're afraid of what's going to happen to us if we give up this faith that
yeah.
has defined our lives. And to some degree, people kind of have this weird, like, they treat it like a disease. Like if they get too close to us or if they stay around us too long, then they're
Yeah.
going to catch it too. And so
With the
I
leftist
understand why it kind of turns into fixing and isolating, but it's definitely not what's
they want
best
us
for either
quarantined.
party.
um. Yeah.
Yes.
Um.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Are you familiar with? Do you know who Barry Taylor is? Oh, so Barry
I don't
Taylor,
know that
he's
one.
like
Mm-mm.
friends with Rob Bell and a few others. He used to be the road manager for AC/DC on the Highway to Hell tour, and he got saved on a
Interesting.
tour bus by reading the Bible. And yeah, he's
Wow.
from the UK. He works in America. I think he might be back in the UK actually now. But um, there's this clip. I'll post a few links in the notes in this podcast because we mentioned a few things. But we can put a link to your book and things like that as well. But he's talking to Trip. What's the guy Trip? He does the Homebrewed Christianity podcast. Trip Fuller? Is it Fuller? I want to say Fuller. I don't know. Could be wrong. You know, and they're talking about this idea of the church trying to fix people, and like they talk about this idea of darkness, right? And Barry Taylor's saying we need to embrace the darkness, and he goes, I don't mean stupid darkness like going to a nightclub or something stupid like that. He's like, we need to, you know, basically saying we need our shadow side and the darkness within us and confront it.
Yes.
And he goes, I don't think it's the job of the church to fix people. He goes, I think it's the job of the church to create space where I think that people can fix themselves. And he goes, and then he says, he's
Mm.
pretty, this typical guy from the UK, like pretty brutal with his language, but he goes, people that try and fix you don't know what the fuck they're doing with their own lives.
Oh my gosh, isn't
That's
that the truth?
literal.
Well, none of us know what we're doing. So who are we to
Yeah,
start telling everybody
yeah.
else, like, oh
I
well,
had this. I'm
you're really screwing that up. Like
I'm
you
going a
don't know
little bit
my
of a
life.
tangent here, but I had this other guy on my old podcast.
Yeah.
Travis Owens, he's an actor and a comedian out in LA. He grew up in the Bible Belt, like in Texas, I think, and grew up sort of religious. And we were talking about the church, and like he was, for context, so he was an actor in a movie that Ray Comfort made called Audacity, which was basically like here's how you preach the gospel to a gay person kind of a movie thing, and it was okay. It was produced well, and he basically got proper actors like him, people that could actually act to do it. But we talk about the church and sexuality, and the way the church has handled sexuality, and we're just saying, and he's like, "Who the hell is the church to say anything about sexuality?" He's like, "No one has messed up sexuality more than the church."
More than the church.
He it was funny because it almost sounded like a bit of a comedy bit that he was doing. He's just like, who the hell is the church to talk about that? Anyways, let's dive back into the rest of the article. I'm kind of worried. I want to keep these podcasts sort of under an hour if we can, just for the sake of the listener. But you say, okay, so the last sentence here is, to their credit, deconstruction is not intended to be demolition. I have a little bit of an issue with that sentence when I think about it, to be honest, because you use the word intended, and I don't know. From my own, I can only speak from my own experience and my own quote unquote deconstruct. I mean, I've been deconstructing since 2008, before it was even a word, obviously.
Right.
I don't know. That sentence does. I'm sort of like literally pondering it now. I'm just like thinking about it, because I don't know, for me personally, that there is any intention behind it. It's not. Do you know what I mean? It just kind of. It sort of changes.
Oh yeah. No. Okay. So when we talk about it, I mean, we've got to talk about like whose intention. There's the intention for the person deconstructing. Yeah. There's the intention of the church, community, body of Christ. To me, the point of this article, and really why I wrote it in the first place, and I wrote it not even intending to submit it to Relevant. I was just going to post it on my personal blog. But for me, the point of the article was to talk about the hope behind deconstruction, and that I really do believe that this movement, this wave of deconstruction that's hit us in the last 10 years or so, I really think it's not only inspired, but it's being spurred on by the Holy Spirit, by God himself, because I think he's trying to get us back to the point. And so when I say it's not intended to be demolition, I'm saying I don't think that God brings people to a place of deconstruction trying to get them to give up Christianity or give up belief in him. I think he has a purpose behind it.
Would it be fair to say
I don't think it's just something that happens to people. I actually think God initiates it.
I can definitely agree with you to a large degree on that. But I'm sort of rethinking that sentence now. Like, is it more or less saying, is it sort of more fair to say that it's referring to God's intention more than ours?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And there is a lot of, there's a lot of argument, like, don't tell people where their deconstruction is supposed to lead. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to force anybody into anything. If their deconstruction leads them out of faith, I'm still going to be right there beside them, loving them, hanging out with them. But I do think God's intention is for a greater purpose, is for reconstruction.
We sort of alluded to that earlier in the conversation as well. Like, some people are, I've seen posts on social media of people saying, don't mention anything about reconstruction, stay away from that. And, you're trying to co-opt it and make people come back. And so that's interesting. That might be another whole conversation. But here you quote Brene Brown, which is great. I love Brene Brown. I've been sending people clips of hers recently. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So you say, as Brene Brown might say, we have to retell the stories we believe about ourselves, as well as those stories that raised us. And just to touch on that, I know I'm doing this on purpose, but it's fine. I'm mentioning a few of my old episodes of my old podcast because this is an opportunity for me to just rehash some of these ideas for new listeners. But I spoke to Paul Young, the author of The Shack, and
man,
I've talked to him multiple times.
He's incredible.
Amazing. I love that guy. I quote him in the first chapter of my book. Actually, I called him up one day. I was having a rough time, and this was just like an off-record conversation. I Skyped him, and he says to me, and I quote this in the book. He's like, Mark, all you need is grace enough for one day. That's all you need. And I'm, oh wow, that just resonated with me so powerfully. I was like, wow, and I'm like,
Absolutely.
book, I'm like, grace enough for one day. I was like, wow, what would that look like? Let's talk about that. And
grace enough for the present moment, for all that we have right now.
It's funny. I've been using this app called Clubhouse. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Oh yeah, I'm on
cool.
it.
We have to connect on there. Well, I've got a group on there called Beyond Deconstruction. It's a movement at this point. It's a revolution. But there's this girl Rachel on there. She calls herself a shadow work coach, and she does this sort of coaching with people. And in the room that she runs, she'll stop halfway through, a conversation, and she'll just go through the room and go, "Hey everyone, what are your present moment feelings?" And she just gets everyone just to say how they're feeling. And I think there's something powerful to that. Like I sort of adopted it. I do it sometimes, just almost ironically in my group sometimes, but I actually think it's a valuable thing to do, to like check in with yourself and people around you and go, because one of the things that Paul Young said to me at the end of my podcast with him was, I asked him this question. I said, how do you become intentional about your own healing process? And he said to me, he goes, there's no healing outside of community. Like, that's so relevant to this conversation, right? Like, I was like, wow. Man, that's so amazing. And I think that's so true. And you mentioned, and it's kind of heartbreaking for me because you talked about, it almost being a tragedy, sort of deconstructing alone. And to be completely honest with you, I have been doing that. That's my story in many ways. Like, I when the Joker movie came out, I really resonated with that movie a lot. And there's an article. Actually, I should pull it up and read it a little bit. I came across this girl on Clubhouse, and she writes these articles and submits them to this magazine online. And she wrote. So this is an article. I won't read the whole thing. There's a couple of lines in it, but so she wrote this article in the cinema after she watched Joker for the first time. She just sat there and wrote this article as everyone was like leaving, basically. There's something here. She quotes that line, "I've got nothing left to lose." The phrase, she says, "I've got nothing left to lose." The phrase some of us, including myself, have uttered. However, what tips the scales that some of us go into the void of violent chaos? However, what tips the scales that some of us go into the void of violent chaos while others heal and thrive? The answer is complicated at best, and not merely a choice. One cannot heal or choose a different life without support of some kind, which is the community idea, right? And access to proper mental health care. So, I mean, I think as somebody, like I mentioned earlier, with mental health issues myself, I think it's worth mentioning, if you are struggling in this deconstruction space and you are dealing with things like depression or anger or anything that's related to sort of mental health and emotional well-being, I just would encourage people listening to, sometimes in the church, when you grow up in that space, you're not taught to reach out and look after yourself. And, again, when I was talking to Paul Young, I said to him, about Shaq, and I said, thank you for honoring the human story, and thank you for creating space for us to be more ourselves and more alive and, more grounded. And so, if anyone's listening and you are struggling, please don't hesitate to get some help. Nothing wrong with that. I've had some great therapy sessions. What did I get up to here? So let's just power through this because
we were at the Brene Brown quote.
Yeah. Here we go. So we have to retell the stories we believe about ourselves as well as those stories that raised us. Through deconstruction, we are able to find the good and the helpful parts of our faith upbringing while reshaping or throwing out the unhelpful. I remember it was Phyllis Tickle. She used to call it a rummage sale. It's like That Rush.
Yes. You read The Great
Oh
Emergence.
yeah. I've got that book here. Yeah.
It's a good
I've got
one.
a lot of books that I haven't read. I just own them. But I'm not a huge avid reader. I wish I was, but I just buy books anyway because it makes me look smart. But the problem with the Gospel Coalition's advice to deconstruct within the church is that most people you'll find in church are uncomfortable with deconstruction. Most view deconstruction as something to be corrected or argued away rather than listening, accepting, and embracing those wrestling with deeply challenging questions about their faith. I will tell you that the more church leaders and Christians attempt to correct deconstructors rather than embrace them in their questions and doubts, the faster their church attendance and numbers will dwindle. That's almost like a challenge, like you're throwing down the gauntlet, like come on.
Well, I've been involved in ministry for I guess 14
Oh wow.
years now. Well, not now, but 14 years ago I started in ministry, and then I left about 2 years ago. But all they've said for years and years is that the numbers are dwindling, and the people giving are dwindling, and they're all older, and so eventually they won't be around anymore, and there won't be any money to fund the church. And so it's always been this thing about how do we keep growing, how do we keep bringing people in, and so it is a little bit like, hey, your numbers are dwindling. They're only going to go faster if we don't change the way that we approach people who are deconstructing.
Okay, let's do this here. So there's a little bit of a chunk left on this article. I'm just going to go right through to the end, and then let's just
Okay.
kind of wind things down, because I will say, to preface this part of the article, this is what really got me. I was like, this part really hit me emotionally, and I was just like, wow, this is profound. So it's the heading is the future of the church. I believe deconstruction is from God. I believe deconstruction is the revival evangelicals have been praying for centuries. I'm just going to read that part again because that line is so cool. Yeah. I believe deconstruction is the revival evangelicals have been praying for centuries. Deconstruction is God's way of returning our hearts to the main point: love. Love of God, love toward ourselves, and love for each other, even love for our enemies. It is painful for me every time deconstruction leads people out of their faith completely. I do not believe that is God's intent for this process, but really, who could blame them? As a life coach working with deconstructing Christians, most of the people I have seen walk away from the faith did so not because of their struggles with God, but because Christian churches have become too wrapped up in the very thing Jesus spoke against with the Pharisees. Who could really blame a person for walking away from a religion when it has been so intertwined with systems of greed, oppression, manipulation, and control? I get it. It often seems all of Christendom has forgotten the greatest commandment: love God with all your heart and all your soul and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. People are not deconstructing because they want to hear theology that tickles their ears. They are deconstructing because most churches have forgotten the core principles of Jesus' ministry. They've forgotten their first love. This is where deconstruction comes in. People searching for the heart of Christianity will continue to flood out of the church doors into homes, bars, parks, and office buildings. They will leave in search of others who know how to discern godly authority from greedy power, and who know how to speak, act, and live the truth in love. There will be a long line of evangelical leaders attempting to co opt and redirect deconstruction for their own purpose. It is a desperate attempt to hold on to their people, hold on to their influence, hold on to their way of life, without having to be held accountable for what their way of life has produced. Ultimately, their efforts will fail. Which I think is a like bloody brilliant place to land this article. Ultimately, their efforts will fail. Like, that is the ultimate. Like, that's laying down the gauntlet right there. Like, that is like, that would be in a movie where it's like, I'm just trying to think of what that would be. What's a movie that would be like a metaphor for that? Like, it's, oh, I want to, it doesn't quite. But I was just thinking, have you seen the movie Ransom with Mel Gibson?
Oh, I
Oh
haven't.
my god.
No.
Well, there's a scene. Oh, it's a little bit to explain. Basically, his son gets kidnapped, and he, puts him up as a they demand a $2 million reward, like ransom for his son, and
Right.
he basically, I'll give you the short version, but he basically picks up on this idea that they're never going to give his son back. Like it's all they just keep making him jump through hoops and do all these things, and he's like, why would they ever give him back? So he goes on live television and has a table with the money in front of him, like the $2 million, and he basically puts out this broadcast, and he goes, actually, now I'm thinking like this does fit actually to what I'm trying to say. But he basically he lays down this challenge, and he goes, "This is the money. This is the $2 million reward." And he's like, "You will not see one dime of this money." He goes, "Instead of putting this as a reward
Hmm.
on your head," he goes, "Congratulations, you just became a $2 million lottery ticket." And he goes, "Except the stakes are much, much higher." He goes, "Do you know anyone that wouldn't turn you in for $2 million?" And he just lays down this challenge, and there's this epic. I won't go into all the language because it's a bit. I know there's a bit of language in this podcast, but it's pretty brutal. But he has this phone conversation with the guy, and he just goes, sort of says to him, stop, effing around, blah blah blah, like, da da. And he's like, give me back my son. And he's like, you're never going to see one dime of this money, not one penny. He's like, da da da. And he's just like, it's this what I like. The reason I bring it up, and I think it sort of fits to what I'm trying to say, but it's this whole deconstruction thing is almost like this community of people. You say song like we're not going to take it, right? Like we're not going to take it. Like that's kind of what
Yes.
it feels like,
Yeah.
right? It does feel like a bit of a revolution. There was recently that campaign called "Religion Shouldn't Hurt." I don't know if you came across that. Um,
Yeah. I
oh,
have.
great!
I
Yeah,
follow
yeah, yeah.
them.
It was like a hashtag "Religion Shouldn't Hurt," and if
Hmm.
anyone's seen the movie Ransom, they're going to know. I'm highly disappointed that you haven't seen it, but that's okay. That's okay. Um, but anyway, no. Like I guess just in sort of wrapping this up, I just want to say thank you for your time today. Like, thank you for connecting. It's been amazing to hear your perspective, and um, if you want to do a little plug for your book and where people can find that and your social media and all that stuff, that'll be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark, man, thank you for your time. I really enjoyed talking with you and connecting with someone that has experienced, God and church and faith and a similar
Mm.
life as I have. It can be very isolating for all of us, but so I'm grateful for this. Yeah, people can find me. I'm mostly on Instagram, which I've said my handle is at Kurtis Vanderpool. You can also find me on my website, kurtisvanderpool.com. I have a blog there and some
Oh,
life
cool.
coaching services. And then my book is called Giving Up Sunday, which I actually wrote while I was employed at a church a
Mm.
couple of years ago. And it's just uh, really a list of things um, that is inspiring people to give up church attendance on Sunday mornings without giving up their faith, and why people are doing that, and what the church could possibly do to kind of turn the
Mm.
tide on that. But so you can find that
Oh,
on
cool.
Amazon.
I can even I've actually got a books section on my website. Um, there's only one book on there at the moment, which is by that girl, Brenda Marie Davies, the God is Grey on YouTube. I don't know if you know. Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yes.
your book,
Wow. Okay. An
your
honor to
book
be
will be
next to her.
second. It might not be next to. I don't know how to look on the website. It might be a list, but yeah, I'll do that. I'll do that straight away. Yeah, that's really great. Well, thanks to everyone for listening. And this has been the pilot episode of my brand new podcast, Beyond Deconstruction. So thanks so much for taking the time.